First order of duty is roll call.
Guile. Knapp.
Here.
Smock.
Here.
Ritterbusch.
Here.
Farrell.
Here.
Zobrist.
Here.
Peach.
Here.
Fick. DeWeese.
Here.
I have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Brad. Next up is the approval of minutes from our regular meeting, June 22nd, 2020. That was included in the original packet. Any questions, omissions, comments from the table regarding the minutes from regular meeting, June 22nd, 2020? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve minutes from the regular meeting?
I move to approve the minutes.
I
Motion
second.
made.
I
Thank you
second.
very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait, actually, does that need to be changed now, Pat? Yeah, I apologize. Brad, we're going to have to call that formally now.
Okay. Farrell.
Yes.
Keach.
Yes.
Knapp.
Yes.
Ritterbusch.
Yeah.
Smock.
Sorry. Yes.
Fine. DeWeese.
Yes.
Zobrist.
Yes.
Approved.
Thank you very much. Next up is the public hearing portion of our meeting. Prior to getting into the two items on our public hearing agenda, our council has a brief notice to the public.
Thank you. Two public hearings are being held tonight pursuant to published notice. Any person wishing to make a comment to the Plan Commission will be afforded an opportunity to do so and will provide their testimony under oath or affirmation, which I will administer. In the event, or for the public hearing tonight on a special use, any person living within 250 feet of the property at issue who wishes to cross-examine a testifying witness may be afforded an opportunity to do so at the discretion of the chairman on matters germane to the issue before the Plan Commission. No members of the public may address a commission or cross-examine a testifying witness until recognized by the chair. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Plan Commission will make a recommendation to the village board. The Plan Commission makes recommendations only. The village board is responsible for taking final action on these matters.
Great, thank you very much. Also, just a notice, we do have some people from the public who have logged in. Again, if you're in and you do have a public comment, we ask that you use the raise hand system inside Zoom so that I know and I can call out by name, and that way we can get everyone's comments if there are any and questions reviewed. All right, as we move forward here, our first item is the ordinance, which is making amendments regarding the minimum building height within R4 zoning district to Chapter 5 of the title. This was discussed briefly in our meeting last month, and Brad, why don't you give us just kind of a quick summary of the process that went into this change?
So this would actually give another layer to someone that in the R4 wanted to go above that 2.5 stories. This would require it to be a special use, therefore would come back through the Plan Commission and then onto the village board. So if you make the recommendation, this is approved, anybody in the R4, you could go to the maximum of 2.5 stories. If you wanted to go above that, then you'd have to go through the process of the special use and the village board.
So clarity here, table, understand that the current zoning as it is allows for unrestricted height up to 40 foot, which would allow 3-story apartments to be constructed in R4 without any other concerns. What this ordinance would do is allow that only under special use, which would come back before this table not only as a zoning request, but also then a special use request, which could allow for the proposal of some additional checks, I suppose. Now, before we get into discussion on it, I do want to mention too, note that one of the things I see sometimes as a common confusion is there is a site plan review as well as a construction review by the village, by the superintendent of public works, and it's pretty thorough. And they do that because they want to have people who are experts in that field always checking on this stuff. So, you know, as we look at these ordinance changes, understand that we are essentially saying that we want this table, whether it's us sitting here or whomever is taking our place in years to come, to potentially put additional rules and regulations on each of these zoning commitments that comes through here. So bear that in mind as we look at this. I don't want to get into a precedent where I think we open a lot of stuff up to special use. I think our ordinances are pretty good, but I do think this one was proposed largely because we had a lot of public pushback on the last proposal. And so this is a way to maybe deal with some of that. Anyhow, I want to make sure everybody at the table understands. So let's go through these questions here. Anyone in the table have any questions about this, or from the public, if you have any questions about this ordinance, please raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I have a comment on this. I'm not sure there's a good rationale for this. We have a number of 2- and 3-story apartments throughout the village. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any real reason why we should be forcing a developer to take that extra step of requesting a special use for a 3-story. I think that what I've looked around and seen in the village here look fine. If you compare a 3-story with their roof design compared to a single family 2-story with attic, you're basically pretty close in height. So I don't really see that there's a real need for this, and I hate to keep driving developers to extra work to go through and file a special use permit, go through all that process. So I don't see a need for this change in the ordinance.
Any other comments this evening from the table? Going to pull up our participant list to make sure I don't miss people from the public who want to speak as well. Brad, if you can help me police that, I appreciate it.
Yes.
I don't see any hands raised.
Nor do I.
I see a human being raising his hand literally. And if you don't mind me helping.
Yes, please do.
Sir, your tag on Zoom is GMAMS, and you kind of raised your hand at me, which I appreciate. If you want to unmute your microphone, now would be your opportunity to be heard. And,
Okay.
And actually, I'm going to have you swear in with me before you provide, since this is a hearing. I do need to swear you in. So if you could raise your right hand, I state your name.
I, Greg Amstutz,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly affirm
that the testimony I am about to give in this proceeding
that the testimony I'm about to give in this proceeding
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to say that I really feel that this land that's right, basically a 45-degree angle across from my property, is a prime example why we need this special R4, because I have been, I was going to, maybe I can say all this at once, but I've been in contact with Steve Lehman. I reached out to him and he was very good to work with. And we had emails and a phone conversation. And I realized that the things that I had discussed with Steve also is something that you guys can't, force him to do, as far as like setbacks and different things that he's agreed on my concerns. But my number one concern was the 2-story height. 3 stories. So I really, with all that he's agreed to do with kind of setbacks and screening, I do support his project over here as long as it's under a 2-story plan. And I would be very concerned to allow this land to go to an R4 when it's R2, if, as we know in life, things can change and situations arise, and all of a sudden he decides not to build. Now anything can come in there with higher density and an R4, and I would definitely be against the project. So as I sit right now, I am fully supporting Steve's project with the 2-story at 20 units. And I have faith that in talking with him that he's going to do the setbacks, moving it to the east, which moves it back away from not only me, but the townhouses on 1900, the Eastbrook townhouses. And it just was, kind of a win-win situation. But without this R4 being the protections in place, it's just too broad of a spectrum. And I would not be comfortable with something being changed that could go drastically. And I think the R4 as it stands now is way too broad and not there, but yet if you don't have it, then it's not allowing a nice project like he has to go forward either. So you kind of put in, you're developing an R4 that can be, to me, it's a good stepping point, from the R3 and the other zoning. So from my perspective, it's a huge issue if it's not has the special use attached to it. I would be very concerned with changes that could come forward in the future. I trust the developer now, and I really feel that he could do a nice development. But I just really feel that this is an exact example of why this zoning is needed. So that's kind of where I'm feeling.
No, I appreciate your commentary. And I, I'm sure everybody understands we're speaking about really both things here on tonight's agenda as one, but I understand why it's one sort of bleeds over into the other. So having heard the comments from the public, are there any other comments either from the public or the table? Does anyone like to address any of those questions or thoughts?
I have maybe a couple questions if I could.
Please.
This might be there might be an obvious answer to this, but 2.5 stories. Does that provide for 3 levels of occupancy with the half story? Why 2.5 stories instead of 2?
Yeah, I would suppose that it's probably, the individuals developers can accommodate that question better than I can, but I can tell you, having been a part of some of these projects in the past, typically you're either below grade, so you're putting a ground level or garden level apartment that's just below grade, or you're doing 2 levels of apartments. You need the height so that you can add additional ceiling height in the unit itself. Apartments that are going to demand the higher rent, apartments that will typically see the least amount of vacancy, are apartments that have higher ceilings. They're basically, it feels more modern. And so ceiling height is probably the number one thing that they utilize outside of density to make sure that they can hit the projected rent target rates that the developer is looking for.
In the ordinance draft, the reason 2.5 was proposed is because your current is 3.5, and so you just subtracted 1 story off your current maximum based on internal discussion amongst staff and consultation with some members of the board in terms of where internal discussions felt like would be a responsible limit if the standard were to be reduced. So specifically 2.5 is just because we made a 1-story deduction off the 3.5 that was the prior limit without a special use.
Can a 2.5 story have the same density as a 3-story?
Well, I guess fundamentally the number of stories doesn't necessarily, it affects your footprint limits your density. I think it has bearing on density, but if you have 1 less story, if you go wider, you can still attain a similar density in the building. But in part of it, I don't know if I can answer that question fully, but I guess I would say, I guess I'm not sure I can answer that question completely. But
I would say mathematically, yes. The density of the development is always going to be capped by the size of the acreage. That's how the ordinance is written. So the height of the construction, what that does is it just dispenses that density in a different way. So you could build, a taller building with the same amount of units in it than you could 2 squat buildings or 2 smaller buildings. So really the density is is just going to be a byproduct of the total square footage. That's usually going to be, I believe when we looked at this one, this particular project that's next on the list tonight, as an example, he was well below the maximum density that would have been allowed in that acreage. But I would say, Craig, you make those determinations based on the zoning first. You kind of start there and look at what is my maximum density that I could put in here as a developer. And then you start working with your city requirements, setbacks, easements, access, safety. And then you look at your parking requirements, and you almost kind of back into what works for a development based on some of those primary factors.
Okay, thanks for that. So this ordinance doesn't affect density at all. It just affects the literal height of the structure, period.
Correct.
Okay.
Or for one supplement, I apologize for interrupting, to add some additional perspective on why 2.5 stories instead of 2. I believe every other zoning classification in the village has a 2.5 story height limitation. As I'm looking through your code, I find that exists in R2, R1, in B2 and B1. So I think in every other zoning district except R4, where there is a building height restriction set forth in number of stories, it's 2.5 stories or 35 feet. So another reason why we did the 2.5 stories instead of 2.
I have maybe one more question, if I could. Kind of along the lines of what Jerry was talking about, with respect to, this affecting all of R4. I think we know what's prompted our ordinance is this specific development. And I was just curious about whether an ordinance could be written for any time zoning changes from, R2 to R4, that this would be in place, but not necessarily in existing R4. Is that too complicated?
If the ordinance changes, that would make it pertinent to every R4, whether there's something existing there, a building or not.
It
Question.
It would be atypical to have zoning a differential height requirement based on when the property became R4.
Okay.
It would create some degree of administrative complexity for staff to have to keep track. We all anticipate imminent projects, but to keep track of when certain properties became R4 into the future would create some administrative effort.
But Craig, I completely get where you're coming from. It's like, in general, I feel like R4 should allow 3 stories or 3.5. But in this specific instance, I feel like there's a need to limit it to the 2 or 2.5. And so are we making a zoning change just because of this? And then 5 years from down the road, we're going to end up reversing it because we think it's not needed to have that? I don't know.
The very fact, from my perspective, the very fact that you're suggesting you want to make a individualized determination that in this project we need a limitation while in others you don't, confirms the propriety of this ordinance. That's at its very nature a special use type determination. So if you believe that the need is to make a differential decision on a project by project basis, then requiring a special use at that 2.5 story cutoff is the technically perfect solution to that problem. So it doesn't prohibit development larger than 2.5 stories, only requires the builder to come back or the developer to come back right before you guys.
And the other question is kind of what we brought up last time. I think I lied. I had another question, sorry. Is about the permanence of it. So we make this decision, the landowner decides to sell, or 10 years down the line, another developer wants to add to the same property within legal constraints. In other words, the design is kind of out the window and changes. And now we have what would be satisfied area homeowners, but someday they might be dissatisfied if some different design or density came along. So there's no way to make it permanent, right? Then there's no way to say this is all contingent on that design. Is that accurate?
I guess, let me make sure I understand the question. So you're thinking if a special use is a requirement for a developer who wants to go above 2.5 stories, the way it would currently work is that developer comes before this table with that special use request. We walk through it with them, similar to last month's meeting. The difference being, instead of just requiring R4, now they need an R4 special use. After they have that, they can build with whatever restrictions were. Again, we're an advisory board, so it would be up to the village to adhere to any specific requests we put in for special provisions. At that point, that gets recorded along with the special use. Pat, if I'm saying this wrong, let me know, but it goes on in perpetuity then, so long as the use of the ground has not changed.
I thought it only went on for a year, and if it wasn't started to be built, it came back.
That's if there's no change at all, then the special use does fall off. I'm under the assumption that the property is built and developed under the special use provisions, and then that developer sells it to another developer down the road, and they want to add something new to it. They're still going to be working off of a parcel that is an R4 special use.
Yeah.
Maybe my question pertains more to the second part of the hearing where we're actually talking about the property itself. I know these are kind of melding together.
They're interconnected.
One is causing the other. I mean, we wouldn't even be talking about this ordinance, right, if it weren't for this specific property situation. So my concern is more about, we have a designer who's designed something. We have homeowner, at least one homeowner that's satisfied with the design, but that design could change in future years or even tomorrow. But we would have already approved it for R4. Yes, perhaps under this contingency of the 2.5 stories, but it's R4 forever. And a different designer can come along, increase the density, move the buildings to places people don't like them. And there's no way around this, right?
No, but this would ensure that it would not be more than 2 stories or 2.5 stories.
So that would be the one caveat. Okay.
Yeah. I think McGrath said it right. The provision, what we're really discussing here, I mean, not to get philosophical about it, but how much control does this table want to be able to impose in the future on requests like this? We're seeing a few in a row here because we have an active developer. We could go years without seeing, a couple more requests like this. So I think the honest discussion point here is, if you are feeling as if you want to have an additional layer of review for a developer who's proposing high density R4, then you have to kind of address it by going in and requiring a special use. That's the only trigger to allow this table to say, okay, we're going to look at each of these individually. The negative to that, I suppose, if you want to look at the other side of the coin, is from a development perspective, it's another layer that a developer now has to walk through, and it's another group of people that developer has to try to impress and do things for. And I guess, again, that challenge to me is always, I've been on the other side of this table. I've been a development rep who's proposing things, and I can tell you there are many communities who aren't lucky enough to have an architect, a general contractor, people who are involved in the community, in the school districts, builders. We have, luckily in this table, there's a lot of acumen in this particular realm, but there are people who jump on these boards that try to be helpful to the community this might maybe terrorize them. I mean, to have this much review and to have to feel like you're being an expert in something, our table starts to maybe step in front of what should be the superintendent of public works. And I think that's what we have to decide here, is how much is enough. And if the concern on this project is great enough to make this change, then we've got it sitting here to vote on. As a development rep on other projects, I don't think a special use for mixed use, or I'm sorry, for R4 is a giant negative. I mean, but I can tell you that there's a lot that goes into these things, and sometimes you don't like to share every little piece of your information as a developer, because if something goes wrong and you have to peel back from that, you've just created a playbook for someone else. So that's maybe one of the things that we just have to be careful of. We don't ever want to be too bureaucratic.
One additional point, it was mentioned that this project was the impetus for the ordinance. And while the ordinance did come to a head at the same time as this project, and this project certainly propelled it along, this ordinance change was discussed internally on an administrative level before this project was before your board. And there were discussion. This was not spur of the moment response to this individual project, but had been a potential ordinance change that had been at least in consideration on a staff level and working with my office for a period of time before it came to you guys. So kind of moved the timeline forward a bit, but it was not, this is not a change that from at least administrative level is 100% in response to this project.
Pat, what was it in response to it? If you can share, what was the proposed concern that internally triggered this discussion?
Well, in discussions internally with those I worked with, the general sentiment was that in the R4 areas of Morton and in Morton at large, there wasn't a perceived appetite amongst the public as a whole for 3.5-story construction, especially in our remaining undeveloped R4 areas in town. So it was perception of community interest that had driven discussions prior to this ordinance coming before you.
Okay. Good conversation. Any other comments this night? I'm going to pull this up, make sure I'm not missing anyone else. Do we need continued discussion, or do we want to have a motion on the table here for this ordinance making amendments regarding the maximum building height in R4?
I move that we accept the ordinance as proposed this evening. Ordinance, I'm looking for the ordinance number here in my notes. I guess there isn't one.
We have a motion.
Making amendments.
I'll second.
Like for me to take roll?
I think Justin's frozen.
I think so too.
Oh, he does look frozen. I thought he was really pensive,
He's thinking real hard.
really hard. I think he's coming back.
Here he comes.
All right. I'm guessing all my kids just got home, everything they could.
I was going to say your kids are gaming.
Can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. All right. When I last left you, Mr. Keach had made a proposal to accept this. Do we have a second?
I seconded. No.
Thank you very much. Go ahead and call when ready, Brad.
Keach.
Yes.
Neff.
Yes.
Ritterbush.
No.
Smock.
Yes.
DeWeese.
Yes.
Zobrist.
Yes.
Farrell.
No.
We have approval.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to the next portion of the public meeting. And I lost everything, so bear with me here while I pull it up. This is a case number 20-2, ZA, subject property, Lot 1, Village of Morton. Petition here by the owners and Steve Lehman This was our tabled case from last month. This is a zoning change from R2 to R4. I'll ask if anyone from the public wants to discuss anything here. Steve, if you'd like to have any kind of a amendment or update on this. If not, that's fine. We can discuss it amongst ourselves as well. But if you do want to have a conversation, please hit the hand raise. Okay. So everyone remember this one?
Can you hear me now?
There you are.
Okay.
Steve, before you go forward, I need to swear you in. You raise your right hand, repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Steve Lehman,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly affirm
that the testimony I am about to give in this proceeding
that the testimony I am about to give in this proceeding
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, sir.
We had, so I don't know if you want me just to jump in, but we had sent over, I had great conversations with Greg, as he mentioned, and that was just helpful to get that feedback from the adjacent property owners, and we've made accommodations to fulfill his requests, and it still works with our goals for the project. So, and also from the feedback we got from our last meeting here. So we've just adjusted or modified the plan to accommodate everyone. And I sent that revision into the village, so I think that's on file. I probably don't have to go over that again, but I can always pull that up on the screen, describe it. But bottom line is we've made accommodations based on discussions and feedback from this council as well as from the neighbors.
Thank you, Steve. Table, are there any questions this evening on this?
Were there any other area homeowners that expressed concern other than ones we've already heard?
I have not heard any besides that. Greg and I had some nice thorough discussions and back and forth. Besides that, I have not heard anything.
So I have a question, prior procedural. So I know a lot of us are thinking of approving this project based on the previous thing that we just approved, although we are only a recommendation and the village board has final say. So assuming that the previous motion gets denied at the village level and we approve this part, I mean, are they linked?
Not necessarily. I suppose you could make your recommendation on the condition of approval of the ordinance which you recommended tonight. But in the absence of them being linked by the movement, they are not in and of themselves linked. Now, both matters will go to the board on the agenda next Monday, the August, I think, 3rd agenda, and I would anticipate both be acted on at the same meeting concurrently, but they are not inherently linked.
Okay,
You would be voting on this in the hopes that Mr. Lehman would be keeping true to his word. The zoning itself would not be restricted automatically. That said, as Mr. McGrath said, the village of Morton is, I think, aware of all of these conversations, and I'm sure they would probably put some provisions in that next when they review this to make sure that he adheres to that. Any other comments regarding this particular request? Do we have enough information ready for us here to make a motion regarding case number, I can read here, 20-2, ZA?
Just out of an abundance of caution, jumping in, I don't see anybody with hands raised, but just as a reminder, there's a member of the public who has not been heard tonight who desires to be heard. Please indicate that you'd like to be heard by raising your hand through the Zoom meeting. You can do so by clicking the button within Zoom. You can unmute your microphone indicate that you desire to have the opportunity to be heard. If you're on video, you can wave your hand or raise your hand, but there are several members of the public present who have not addressed the board tonight, and just wanting to ensure nobody who wanted to be heard missed their opportunity. I want to jump in, Your Honor, before you move forward to a vote. I do see.
Thank you.
Actually, I don't see any hands raised myself. And
Bruce Simmons unmuted his microphone.
thank you. Jessica?
Yes, this is Bruce. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can, Bruce. Thank you. Let's get you signed in, swore in.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's
thank you.
swear you in, Bruce. If you could raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Bruce Simmons,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear
that the testimony I am about to give in this proceeding
that the testimony I'm about to give in this proceeding
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I guess just a question. I'm in the property directly south of the property in question. Based on the discussion going back and forth, it sounded like some changes had been made in terms of the building layout or placement in the land. Is there any sort of a diagram or picture that would show what the new layout of that thing is?
Yeah, absolutely. And we could, I don't know, Justin, I don't know if you want to share it or if we could share our screen and put that up on the board.
Steve, please share your screen because I don't think I have the updated one on this agenda packet.
Okay, we'll take it. Okay, so yeah, after discussions with Greg and the Planning Commission, from what we had heard from last time over the last month, we have done a few things here to make improvements to it so it's less imposing to the adjacent properties. One of the things is reducing the number of units to 20 only. The other thing is reducing the height to make it, well, our plan had always been, I think, a 2-story, but this is making it confirm that we're on the same path here and committed to the 2-story limitation. We've also we've made sure that the visibility from Queenwood would be primarily landscaping, greenscapes, and trees. And so by bringing the building back more towards the middle of the property, that's allowed for more of a buffer zone for the trees and landscaping. And we're actually more removed from Queenwood than what the neighboring properties are. So we kind of modeled up the box shapes of the neighboring properties. Here, you want to pull that up? And it just shows that we're trying to stay central to the property, and then that way it's less imposing and doesn't obstruct the view for Queenwood or any of the others.
Is there now one building or 2 buildings?
We're looking at it's the same footprint as the 2 buildings, and then geometrically, as we place it more central, you can see that the property lines curve in. So we're trying to find that sweet spot where we have the maximum greenscape. And so just seeing what the distance between the buildings is yet to be determined on that. But as we're moving it further away from Queenwood and making it more concealed, then those buildings are coming more towards the central of the property.
Okay, very good, very well, thank you. The only comment I would have is if there's any way for you to have landscaping, trees, shrubbery, something toward the south side of your project, just to minimize the direct view of your tenants to my home, that would be appreciated.
For sure, we'll do that, absolutely.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Steve. Any other questions or comments from the public this evening? Give a few minutes here for anyone to find that hands up button or flounder in front of the camera until one of us catches it. Okay. So table before us, we have case number 20-02ZA with some changes from last month. I think, we've walked through this considerably now. The request here is from R2 to R4. As we mentioned earlier, this is not tied directly to the ordinance above, but is of course informed somewhat by it. So do we have, if we don't have any other questions or comments, and if public is done, it's on us now to make a vote on this.
And I just want to reiterate, if I could, by approving this, we are trusting that the developer will develop exactly what he designed and no more than what is.
You're approving a land use change. So you're approving R2 to R4. The developer is indicating he intends to develop the site in this fashion, but rezonings are perpetual and permanent unless they come back before you. And you can't rezone for a project and say this rezoning only happens if you do exactly what you're saying. So what he's saying is what his plans are. If you rezone it and his plans change, as long as they're within the bounds of R4, or if he sells a property, doesn't develop it, and somebody else comes in and develops this as R4, then as long as they're operating within the bounds of what R4 allows, then they're permitted to do so.
And that's what's kind of troubling about this, because we're looking at designs and we could ask ourselves, why are we looking at designs?
I could speak to that. Justin, are you still?
Yeah, Steve.
Between Justin and Pat, you can help me out with the procedural aspect of it. But I do know that we have pre-approved financing for the project. I know I've invested a lot of time and money into it as designed. And I've got a long-term vested interest in the community. So from where I'm sitting, of course, my word's solid on this, but also the fact that I've been sworn in that this is the intent, the goal is to start on this as designed and as shared. I don't know how far that gets us. That's where Pat and Justin can clear up, but to me, that goes a long ways.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And Craig, to speak to your question, the reality is, as far as for perspective, really, from this table, a developer or a rep will oftentimes bring as much information as they can to share, because the idea is, specifically on a zoning change from an R2 to an R4, they want us to be informed. They want us to see what their plan is for this, because it has a higher likelihood of approval when they do that. Now, that said, it begs the question, how much control do we need to have? I mean, we at this point in time, I suspect the reason why Mr. Lehman has kept this on this agenda rather than waiting another month for the proposed change in ordinance for special use to potentially become approved by the village is timeliness. These projects bleed money from the moment you begin generating plans, site plans. Everything that they have shown us has a direct cost. And so I'm sure that part of this is Mr. Lehman trying to keep this project on some sort of a schedule. So this is before us now, as opposed to another 30 or 45 days, which delays everything even further.
To further answer your question, it's very common in other rezoning proceedings before you that the developer brings you what they're going to do with the site. It's not a contractual commitment that they're do exactly as stated when they rezone. We've had, in recent memory, we had the 17-acre site on Harding Road, which was rezoned on petition of the village, where there was discussion regarding the intended use of the site. And then we had the Peoria Sand and Gravel petition to rezone the ground south of Gold's Gym, and there was discussion of the proposed development of the site for a daycare center. That also involved a special use, so that may not be as perfectly applicable. Certainly it's up to you guys individually to determine the relevance to you of the plans for the development, but to your point, you're correct that the plans are not, you're not voting up or down on the plan, you're voting up or down on the rezoning.
And I'll just say thank you for that explanation. And I'll just say one last thing. I mean, I can't think of a developer that could have done a better job than Steve in presenting his cases and talking to homeowners. I mean, so kudos to him for shown himself to be a great communicator and someone that's willing to work with people. So it's absolutely nothing on him. It's more about the procedures. In my mind, I go through a protocol. When we're going to make a zoning more impactful, it may perhaps in a negative way to residents, I think the first thing that goes through my mind is, do the residents care? And in this case, they did. And then my next question is, okay, so then I care. And then if the developer can work it out so the residents are pleased with it, I'm still left with not having that guarantee. And that's what I'm just trying to express is I'm glad he's worked with the residents. I can see approving this, but I'm just trying to understand what role the designs have when there's no guarantee that those are the designs that'll get utilized, just in general.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, we had offered individuals the opportunity to be heard by unmuting their microphone. I noted, and I appreciate Jessica's help with this, Tim Magnuson raised his hand and unmuted. And since we had not announced a conclusion of the public hearing period of time, and in the interest of ensuring all those interested the opportunity to talk, I'd suggest before a motion, it'd be appropriate for the chair to recognize Mr. Magnuson and have him sworn in to provide comment.
You bet. Thank you for that. And thank you, Jessica. Tim, if you can go ahead and swear in with Mr. McGrath, we would love to hear your comments.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Tim Magnuson,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear and affirm
that the testimony I am about to give in this proceeding
that the testimony I'm about to give in this proceeding
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, my only question at this point is, maybe I dialed in late to this meeting, but where exactly is this property that we're talking about?
The subject property rests off of Queenwood, but also back, is it Second? Guys, I don't have the form in front of me now.
Yes,
Yeah.
Second Avenue would be the cross street.
So Queenwood and Second?
That would be
Yes,
the
with
nearest
no
cross
direct
street, yes.
with no direct access off of Queenwood, though.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're very welcome. And Pat, good job doing that. I don't know what happened to your audio, but you're either scuba diving and hit that 40-foot marker or something went crazy, but I think you're back now.
My apologies.
No, you're fine. I don't see any other. I'm going to give another minute here for the public. Is there anyone else from the public before we close out this proceeding and do a vote? Is there anyone else who has any comments regarding this particular request? Okay. Back to us, table. Case number 20-2, ZA. Do you have enough information to make a recommendation on this, or do we require some further discussion? If you're uncertain what to do here, let's talk through what the questions are.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve.
Thank you, Mr. Ritterbusch. We have motion on the floor for approval of case number 20-2 ZA. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you very much. You may call when ready, Brad.
Nat,
Yes.
Ritter Bush,
Yes.
Smock,
Yes.
Deweese,
Yes.
Zobrist,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Keach.
Yes.
Approved.
Thank you very much. Steve, thank you as well. And I want to thank the public for coming out and bringing their questions to this table and helping us through this. That will close the public comment portion of our meeting. Any other business? I've seen none on the agenda. Brad, was there anything brought at the last minute that you need to discuss or want to bring before us?
No, nothing tonight.
Okay, great. If that's the case, then all we need is motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
Second.
I think you have to call this one too, Brad.
Yes. Ritter Bush,
Yes.
Smock,
Yes.
Zobrist,
Yes.
Deweese,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Keach,
Yes.
Knapp.
Yes.
Approved.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time tonight.